We are next going to skip an item and take item 6.2, as we are very fortunate to have the chairman of our Little Hoover Commission here with us to report. So, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to come up. Welcome to the Board of Governors.
Thank you. President Himmelstein, Chancellor Scott, members of the board. My name is Dan Hancock, and I'm completing, as of now, my 4th year as chairman of the Little Hoover Commission, and I'm almost completed my 15th year as a member of the Little Hoover Commission. That is the totality of my government resume. Yeah. Before I begin my remarks, I thought I'd give a little piece of advice to Chancellor Scott, which comes from my Uncle Charlie, who lived in Bakersfield and worked all his life as a painter for the Kern County School District. And when he retired, gave me his philosophy. He says, Dan, said, I get up in the morning with nothing to do, and when I go to bed at night, my goal is to only be half done. I don't normally read presentations because I don't like to do it, but I have a lot of material to cover, and I want to do it relatively quickly, hopefully under 10 minutes, and so I'm going to. But as is the practice when I chair the meetings at the Hoover Commission, we interrupt people all the time as the sort of impulse hits us to ask questions, comments, or for clarification. So feel free. You won't throw me off, I don't think. Last week, the Commission issued its recommendations for bolstering student success at the community colleges. In many instances, the Commission's recommendations align with those developed independently by the Student Success Task Force. It is a subject that's important to the Commission and important to the state. The Commission's recommendations are based on 3 public hearings, 3 public advisory committee meetings, extensive interviews, and review of existing research. The study marks a return to a topic the Commission took up 10 years ago and was prompted by recent work the Commission had done on career technical education and economic development. Through those studies and other independent research, the Commission became concerned about the numbers of students who entered community colleges with aspirations of earning certificates and degrees only to leave early without completion. We looked at a number of studies which reinforced those statistics. And though the state of California has a higher than average participation rate, it ranks low in completion, and as a result, even though California contributes less on average for each student, the cost of completion per student is nearly half again higher than the national average. The problem is this. In unaffordably large numbers, students were leaving without the certificates or degrees that they had hoped to earn, and neither they nor the state was getting the return on the time and money invested. The recession compounded already existing problems. As you are all well aware, the system experienced significant budget cuts as more students sought to enroll. Some had been turned away by CSU or UC, others had lost their jobs and needed new skills, and others just couldn't find work and needed more education to be attractive to the job market. The result was fewer classes, longer waiting lists. But let's be clear. The system was badly in need of reform before the recession hit. The pressures resulting from the budget cuts caused by the recession only underscore the need for those reforms. Through the state's funding formula, the state is encouraging more enrollment, and yet the reality is that colleges are rationing classes. But we are not doing it in a rational way. Instead, we are requiring students to take more time to finish, allowing underprepared students to take college-level classes and fail, thus discouraging the very students whom we as a state need to be successful. The Commission's recommendations ask more from students, rewarding them with enrollment priority for attending orientation and developing an education plan and sticking with it. It also means putting a limit on how many credits they can earn at state-subsidized tuition rates and demonstrating progress and commitment to qualify for fee waivers. The goal is to help them move up and be better prepared, move forward with their lives, making room for new students behind them. Our recommendations also ask more of colleges to help students move up and forward by empowering you, the Board of Governors, and the Chancellor to develop policies that reward student success and offer districts both incentives and flexibility to deliver those goals. The Commission believes that the Board and the Chancellor must have greater authority to drive improved performance at the district level, and in its experience has seen that public bodies respond well to financial incentives. The Commission recommends that the Board and Chancellor be given the authority and independence to create those financial incentives, recognizing full well the challenges posed by the great diversity of our community college system. We have a decentralized system, which is a strength for addressing the state's diversity. But for it to work as a system, it needs to be focused on the goals that drive better outcomes for students. The Commission recommends that the legislature explicitly state that the primary mission of the community college system is advancing measurable student progress in 3 key areas: basic skills, career tech ed, and transfer and associate degrees. The goal has to be understood from the capital to the classroom. In this, the Commission echoes the priorities set by Chancellor Scott. The state's longstanding goal of open access has led to a focus on enrollment, absent a discussion about completion. The Commission wants to preserve open enrollment access for students who are prepared to do college work and are building their skills to enable them to meet their higher education goals and willing to develop a plan to get there. Colleges may offer other classes, but they are secondary to the mission of student achievement in basic skills, career tech ed, degrees, and transfer. Districts are free to offer other classes that are secondary to the primary mission, but they should fund them locally. Funding and enrollment priorities must reinforce the primary mission, and the best place to build the strategies to implement the mission is in the Office of the Chancellor. On the issue of governance, we heard from district trustees and college presidents who told us that the Chancellor needs more authority and more independence if the state were to achieve its goals and the system was to function as a system. There is a precedent for this in the establishment of the California State University as an independent system. To truly head the community college system, the Chancellor's office has to have the authority to direct the state's money to the community college's core missions, creating incentives for improving outcomes. The office needs to be part of the same budget stream that supports the community college system. At the same time, the Board of Governors should give greater authority on the model set by the State Board of Education to grant waivers and other statutory relief from the rules and regulations to districts so that they can accomplish the mission of advancing student progress. Granting greater authority to the board would address another related issue. The Commission heard from trustees and college presidents that they felt hamstrung by rules that discouraged increased coordination among districts and prevented districts from pursuing consolidations that would create economies of scale and other efficiencies. The legislature should grant the board the authority to set up an appeals process that will allow the board to temporarily exempt districts from statutory requirements when funding is reduced. On the issue of funding, empowering the Board of Governors and the Chancellor to lead the system according to a system-wide mission are important first steps, but giving them the funding tools to drive change is essential to actually implement the mission. In the funding, the Commission seeks greater transparency and consistency within the boundaries of Prop 98. The current approach puts too much emphasis on enrollment, the input, and not enough on student success, the output. The Commission recommends that the state align spending priorities with the mission of helping students achieve their educational goals. With the money allocated directly to the colleges, the Chancellor has few tools to create fiscal incentives to drive districts towards system-wide goal changes. Instead, funding for districts should be allocated by and through the Chancellor's office. The Commission recommends that the Board and the Chancellor's office develop a strategy to tie a portion of funding to student outcomes. It also recommends that any revenue resulting from an increase in tuition be used by the Chancellor's office to support student success practices at the district level. The Commission heard that the current way the state splits education money is out of date and puts the colleges at a disadvantage when demand rises during economic downturns, when more people turn to the community colleges to retool job skills or learn new skills for better jobs. The Commission asked the legislator to re-examine the existing formula-driven policies and develop a better way to determine the annual funding for community colleges. This new approach should be transparent, consistent from year to year, rather than the statute that currently is regularly waived to the detriment of community colleges. On the issue of adult education, as it began this study, the Commission heard a great deal about the number of students who are unprepared for college-level coursework. Some could catch up quickly with some basic skills classes. Others were able to do college-level work in some areas but needed remedial work in other areas. Yet others had far more significant education deficits. As the Commission examined the importance of preparing adults for college-level work, another dynamic was unfolding. Adult school programs at local school districts were unraveling at a pace that threatens the state capacity to provide this kind of education. California has had adult schools since 1856, and the need is as urgent now as it was then. The erosion of adult programs at the local district level signals that it's time to move responsibility for all adult education to the community college system. Community colleges have a direct stake in how well these students learn. San Diego and San Francisco have taken on this responsibility and have seen that their adult programs have been the largest producers of students for their community colleges. The Commission is encouraged by their example. Trustees and college presidents told us that they would be willing to take on these programs, but not unless their colleges received the funding to do so. Recognizing that these programs won't survive without resources, the Commission recommends moving the categorical money that has been allocated for adult school programs to the community college system for adult education programs. These recommendations won't be easy to implement, and opposition to some should be expected. But the Commission feels that these changes it recommends were needed before the recession and are essential now, both for the sake of our students and our state's future. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, comments or questions on the report? Member Baca.
Yeah, I have a question with regard to the financial incentives part. And I was just wondering how much, haven't had the opportunity to read the entire report yet. I've read parts of it, or at least the executive summary, but did you, in the process of making the recommendation or developing toward the recommendation, look at examples of institutions elsewhere that have done incentive-based funding and how they dealt in particular with the access issue? You know, obviously, there's a level of incentive that probably is generally acceptable, but did you look deeper into the impact or maybe unintended consequences of it?
We've looked at a number of studies from around the country, and frankly, the results are mixed. Some have abandoned their attempts, some have put them in relatively successfully, and it's an area that meets a lot of institutional resistance in the educational community. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all or a formula for this. One of the recommendations we made in this area for the board is take a couple of willing districts within your system and work with them on sort of a pilot basis to develop programs and try them. Because I don't think you're going to find, nor did we find, sort of the magic formula for how it's going to work. Nor do I think, and I don't think the Commission thinks, that you'll come up with one formula because, you know, as I've said on a number of times in public and at our hearings, different things are going to work differently in different parts of your system. What works at Deanne's and Foothill may not work at Los Medanos, and I think you've got to be nuanced and careful about how you do it. But I think clearly, as we saw with President Obama's race to the top, if you want to achieve a goal or an objective, the education system responds to financial incentives. And so we didn't give you a specific recommendation on which one to pick. They're out there, and we can provide them for you. We've got copies of the studies, and we reference them in our report. But I think it's something that the board's going to have to work hard on with local districts to develop the right incentives and prepared to be flexible and learn from how you do it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was one or two that stuck out in your mind.
I don't have them at the tip of my, off the top of my head, no.
Member McDougall.
Yes, I have one comment and one question. Comment is, number one, I appreciate greatly the work of the commission and tend to be very sympathetic and supportive of the conclusions that you have presented with us today. And it certainly is reinforcing to see it parallel the outcomes of the year-long work of the Student Success Task Force. So this appreciation
Thank you.
for your effort. The second question is more for me to try to understand the Little Hoover Commission itself. I don't really have a sense of where it has where its authority comes from, where the report, for example, that you've worked on for so long and produced, where that is going to go and what, if you will, responsibility there is to follow up on that. I just don't have a contextual framework for the Little Hoover Commission itself. So if you have a moment, I'd like to get filled in on that.
Okay. Well, we were established in statute in 1962 by the then governor, Edmund G. Pat Brown, and it was based upon somewhat on we're the Little Hoover Commission because there was a big Hoover Commission in the late 1940s that Herbert Hoover headed up for Harry Truman that led to a reorganization of the federal government. And so we're kind of based on that model, which is our charter is to look at the operations of government and make recommendations to the governor and the legislature about ways to improve those operations. And we have a 60-year history now, 50-year history of doing that. We can have no more than 7 Republicans, or 7 from one party and 6 from the other party. There's 13 of us. We have a reputation for being bipartisan, nonpartisan. You know, I tell all my new commissioners when they come to the board, to the commission, I say, check your Republican and Democrat hat on the door at the door because they don't really apply here. We're all about trying to make government better. In response to your specific question, our clients are the governor and the legislature. And so you will see we have a cover letter that goes with this report, and it goes to the governor and it goes to the legislature with our recommendations. We are only a recommending body. We have no statutory authority to implement anything. We do, as a matter of course, try to advocate for our positions. You will see us write letters in support of legislation. You will see us testify at legislative hearings. You will see us interact. You won't see us, but we interact, behind the scenes with, members of the executive and members of the legislative branch and advocate for our positions. I like to say, the commission tries to take on tough issues, takes on issues that others don't want to take on. You saw that in our pension report that we issued last year where my directive to the commission was, let's take on all the stuff that everybody else is afraid to take on. And what I say often is what we do with our reports is plant seeds. And then we water those seeds and hopefully they grow. It doesn't always happen quickly, but we try to be thoughtful, based in fact, and deliver ideas into the public arena that are worthy of debate. I'll give you an example. It's how long it takes sometimes. 2004, we wrote a blueprint for realignment of the social services system. Last year, the governor made a number of suggestions on how to realign delivery of both prison services and social service, health services. Many of those recommendations come right out of our report, which we did in 2004 about real lives and real services. And so that's sort of our approach to things. We know these are hard issues. We know change is often evolutionary and not revolutionary. We're patient in that regard, but we believe putting provocative ideas into the public arena drives debate and drives change, and that's what we try and do.
Thank you for doing that. I should have known it, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Member Baum, then Member Ramos.
So will you be working with the legislature and finding sponsors of legislation based on your recommendations? How will that work?
We're sure going to try, yeah. That's the goal. The report only came out last Tuesday. We'll be walking the halls and talking to people and hopefully with your support and maybe your encouragement and your participation, willing sponsors to carry pieces of what we're talking about. I would not anticipate that we'd get all of this in one bill, but pieces of it and parts of it, I think we can hopefully get some things introduced that would carry these things farther toward their ultimate objective.
Excuse me, Member Ramos, I forgot. Member Belinsky was in the queue before.
I just wanted to follow up on that for kind of clarification. So there's a report that's taken a lot of time to put together,
Took us a year.
a lot of solid recommendations being made, and I was wondering if there's some kind of a structured process of how to move forward with it. I mean, I may be very confused at the moment, but I'm getting this sense like, well, we'll try to go and lobby or negotiate with certain legislators, see what they'll pick up, what they won't pick up, as opposed to something that's much more structured than that, to say that all of these recommendations will be addressed, and here's the process, and here's how we can include people, how we can invite people in to be a part of that process.
I would say probably your prior comment, given our statutory authority and what our Legislative Enabling Act allows us to do, we're a recommending body. We're not an implementing body. So our ability to implement is just like many people, we're really at the pleasure of the governor and the legislature to take our recommendations and use them in a productive way. Candidly, some things we recommend never get adopted.
Right.
A lot of them, as I said, take some time, but ultimately, we're patient and we're persistent, and we have been fairly successful over the years in getting things that we recommended implemented. I'll give you another example. We recommended doing away with the incarceration portion of the Department of Juvenile Justice. I think we did that 3 years ago. That process is finally in place, and there was a lot of resistance to it, and there's a lot of institutional resistance to it. But we came to the conclusion that it was too expensive. The youth were not being well served in the state system, and they'd be better served in the local systems. And so that was a recommendation we made, and that's now in the process of coming to fruition, and I think will be fully implemented within the next couple of years.
Member Ramos.
Thank you. Let's hope we don't have to wait 20 years to employ some of these
Hopefully not.
recommendations. We have, as you know, some very parallel findings from our student task force, and indeed some emergent legislation that we as a board are very interested to see through, that dovetail very nicely on the essential findings that you shared with us from the Little Hoover Commission. So to bring some of these prior questions kind of full circle, let me just ask very pointedly, is there a possibility that there could be active coordination between this body and the Little Hoover Commission in our advocacy efforts around those specific pieces of legislation, and by definition and extension, other pieces of legislation that you may be advancing as part of your advocacy agenda in relationship to these?
As long as they're consistent with our report, absolutely yes.
Okay. So are you familiar?
And, there are things in our report that aren't in your report. That,
Correct.
The governance issues, for example,
Correct.
We take on, pretty forthrightly.
Right.
And, we're going to work on those across the street, or we're not
Yeah.
across the street right now.
Are you,
I'm in my
are you familiar with the current pieces of legislation, though, that are being advanced?
Yeah,
from
vaguely. I mean, I haven't read them, but
Okay.
I'm aware they're there,
Okay.
and we've talked about them, and
Right.
I think generally we're in support of them, and so
Okay.
yeah,
Well, to
I
whatever
think
extent
coordination on
possible.
those issues is a good idea.
Great. We would look forward to that. Thank you.
Member Azumi.
Like my colleagues, Chairman Hancock, I want to thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the report and the time that the commission spent putting the report together. I just want to ask, in terms of the response you've gotten to the report, yesterday Chancellor Scott had mentioned that we had got for the Student Success Task Force recommendations that we had received editorially a lot of support amongst the state's newspapers. I wondered what the reception has been to the commission's report, and also to what sorts of pushback have you seen, in relation to the report?
I think the report's new enough still that we haven't got a lot of response one way or the other. There's the newspapers are, depends kind of what's sort of high on their agenda. This isn't probably the sexiest topic in the world for them, but we have been in contact with a number of newspapers around the state. Our executive director is the former city editor of the Bee, and so we have lots of contacts, and we're talking to them. And so I would anticipate in the coming days and weeks that you'll hear more and more about this report. And I do expect some pushback on a number of the recommendations that we made, but haven't got any specifically yet.
Any other board member comments or questions?
You know, I guess I have maybe just one more. You mentioned the completion rates, and you cite the cost per student that's provided by the state, and then also the comparisons with nationally with completions and the cost per completion, and that we're the state 50%, I guess, lower or half as much.
Half again as much, 50% higher on a per student completion
Nationally.
rate.
What were in doing that? Were you attributing that to?
Well, I think as we talk about in our first recommendation, I mean, there's a number of factors that go into, why student success rates in the state of California are low. And I mean, my own personal view is part of it is there are a number of kids in the system who aren't ready to be in the system yet. So they're set up for failure because they're not ready to proceed with college level work. There are a number of other students who spend a lot of time in the system and don't make a lot of progress toward any perceived academic goals. And so I think there has been a lack of discipline in the system about who's in the system and how we track them and what we expect of them. And I think that's led to a sort of misappropriation and misallocation of the resources that are available so that those that are most serious and most ready to proceed, on a track toward an achievable goal aren't necessarily prioritized in the system. And I think that's consistent with some of the things that you talked about in your student success or in the student success task force as well.
You would conclude that greater access in the state of California as compared to other states, and that produces a different kind of statistical outcome.
I think open access produces, open access meaning I think open access for qualified students and students with serious purpose is, it's part of our core mission. It's been part of our mission since we established the community college system. I believe in it. The commission believes in it. But the corollary to that is students that are prepared and are serious about proceeding with their educational goals.
And do you think that also that maybe there's significant differences between states in terms of what's established as a completion or being able to gain a certificate degree?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure every state's got a certain degree of variation to it. Statistics are only as you got to use statistics for, and examine them carefully to make direct comparisons. But I think most of the people we heard from in talking about the California system acknowledged, and even the people within the system from the districts and the chancellor's offices and the presidents of the various districts acknowledged that the rates of completion and the rates of achieving the measurable goals were lower than they should be. And I think that was our conclusion, and we think it's important that trend be reversed.
I'm just interested in your opinion with regard to the adult school shift. Do you think that's a doable thing?
I do, yeah. I do think that's a doable thing. I think you'll get some pushback from the K-12 system, but I think, from our testimony and from what we uncovered, I think the K-12 system has basically punted the adult, or not all of them, but a number of them have punted the adult ed problem away. And I think adults belong in an adult system. They don't belong in a K-12 system. I think the community colleges are the appropriate place for them. And the places that we looked at, the work that they're doing in San Francisco and the work that Dr. Carroll's doing in San Diego is really quite exemplary in handling that population. And I think they're doing a terrific job of it. And I think it offers much more promise for success at the community college level than it does at what I think is sort of a dying branch of the K-12 system in the adult ed area.
Thank you for your work.
Okay.
Welcome.
Chairman Hancock, just one question for me, kind of following up on Member McDougall's about the commission. You took a year to do this. Does the commission pick, say, 1, 2, or 3 items over a year's time, or was this past year devoted to the community college issue?
We're usually doing about 3 to 4 studies at a time. So this was one, we were working, we issued one, I think it was earlier this year, on regulatory reform. So that was one we were working on. We did one on, we're working on one right now on renewable energy governance and how the renewable energy implementation strategies are working in the state with all the different layers of that. So we're usually working on 3 or 4 different things at a time. And we're about to start one on the state park system next month. So.
Okay. Well, we are pleased you chose our system to look at, and we're glad.
That's good. A lot of people aren't always pleased when we choose their area.
We are, and we're pleased that some of your recommendations mirror the ones that we have endorsed. So thank you and your staff's work on this issue.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for having me.
Uh-huh.